Right.
Hello and welcome to Messed Up to Setups. I am comedian Michael Halcomb, and today I have the great privilege of chatting with another comedian, Handsome Harold. Yeah, Harold, dude, it's good to see you this morning. We're recording in the morning here in Hawaii. It's good to see you, man.
Good morning. Good to see you.
Everything seems so messed up, but it's just a setup.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to this. Harold, for those of you who might not know him, and we'll show Instagram here on the screen in just a second, and you definitely should go follow him over there. He's always putting up some good stuff. The handle is at handsome.harold. And so go follow him. You'll see it here in just a moment. But Harold got a pretty unique stand-up comedy routine or persona. He's got a lot of music, does just regular stand-up, does characters, act outs, a very well-rounded performer. So it's great to have you here, man. So I'm looking to get into your journey. You got stuff on Spotify. Tell us a little bit about the Spotify real quick.
So I started off my comedy, I guess, tenure over 15 years ago. So I started around year math around maybe 2009, 2008-ish. I was a young aspiring theater major at the time, and with a background in just noodling around on an acoustic guitar. So what initially started off as me trying to be a rock star, I realized that I don't like being in bands. And so I just started doing things by myself. And I did a theater production where there was a variety show. And for whatever reason, while noodling around my guitar, I just made up a silly parody song on the spot, and it took off. So I wrote most of my songs in community college, and it kind of kicked off from there. You fast forward to 2015, I recorded those songs on an album, and I kind of just checked the box, said, hey, I did that, and I moved on, focusing more on my military career. And then COVID happens, and I ran into Jose Dynamite, who said, hey, come back to the stand-up comedy scene, play some of your material, we'd like to have you again. And then after I shortly got back, I decided, you know what, I'm going to put down the guitar for a little bit and try my hand at an actual stand-up. So now it's become a crossbreed of both whenever I perform, and more so now leaning more towards the stand-up than the musical stuff.
That's a good mix. I mean, the first time I saw you perform, you were dressed up as like a Filipino Donald Trump, right? I think that's what it was, or some version of Donald Trump. I think you have another name for it. But so I saw that. And then I think it was only after that I saw you maybe at Anna O'Brien's here locally with the guitar. And then only after that I saw you doing when you were doing Donald Trump, you were doing stand up, obviously. But then just sort of like in your natural sort of persona, Handsome Harold, doing stand-up. So it's a wide variety of stuff. I don't know anybody else, personally who's doing that many different things in the stand-up realm. So it's pretty cool that you have that like wide variety of things to do. So yeah, it's pretty neat. So you did let's backtrack to this parody song. What was the parody song, the first one?
So initially, it was short-lived. So I was noodling around on middle school. I wrote a bunch of cover parodies for my science class and history classes for extra credits. So like one was like a System of a Down cover that covered Hawaiian history. Another one was like a No Doubt cover parody of how like your gastrointestinal system works. That was very short-lived, but then I wrote a bunch of original songs about I was a freshman in college, so it was a song about like my first zombie ex-girlfriend. I correlated the Pokemon cartoon series to like slavery because capturing animals against your will and all that. And some of them resonated. So the most popular one that stuck with me from my initial aspirations was the Dots song. And so Dots is a song about Pac-Man. Very repetitive song. It's very easy. It's a good earworm that can get stuck in your head. And so that's one of the songs that I continue to
dude. Speaking of earworm, and I've been meaning to tell you this. I forgot, dude, literally for 2 weeks straight. You should, as a musician, as a comedian, you should be proud of them. For 2 weeks straight, I've had the line in my head. What's up, my Asian friend? Right? Oh my gosh, dude.
Oh, so we're referring to that. That's the Blink-182 cover for What's My Age Again. So that actually is a nod to. There's a live album of Enema of the State and some of their other tracks called The Mark, Tom, and Travis Show. That's one of my favorite live albums to date. And in the live performance of What's My Age Again, the original for them, they have a quick nod. They go, "What's my age again? Where is my Asian friend?" Just because those guys are super silly when they play on stage. And that they'd actually be one of the inspirations for my musical comedy. Because when I first heard Blink-182, I didn't realize that you could be funny at the same time. And so when I heard the live album, like they have really great riffs. They have really great like little bits in between their songs. And they're just, their energy on stage with each other is just so organic. And I go, well, I kind of want to be that, you know? So
Right.
you coupled that with, so Blink-182, Weird Al Yankovic,
Yeah.
Andy Kaufman, a lot of inspiration. So
Have you watched much of Adam Sandler's stuff?
yep.
I mean, like even his most recent special, he's bringing out the instruments and doing a lot of hilarious songs. That dude, I mean, it's genius, right? But yeah, that line of yours has been stuck in my head. And then it's, I saw you do it at Lokahi here, and then you switched it up right at the end because Trey was in the audience, another local comedian. What's up, my half black friend? So, but that literally, dude, that's been in my head for 2 weeks now, like since I've heard you sing that. So yeah, kudos to you on that. So when did you start playing guitar?
I started playing guitar in middle school. So this is around 2000, around 2000. My uncle from the Philippines. So Filipinos are just known to be great singers. And even though they have really thick accents speaking English, they're able to emulate very good American or even English singing accents. So like a great example would be Arnel Pineda from Journey. They actually picked him up from YouTube because he would just do Journey covers. And they go, that guy's really good. But when you talk to him, he has a super thick accent. My Uncle Boy, he does a very great John Denver performance. So he performs all over Southeast Asia as a John Denver impressionist and cover band.
Amazing.
Yeah, so he shipped over a guitar in 2000 to my older brother. And my older brother, he had minimal aspirations of being a musician. He's a Marine. So he's really good at hitting things and blowing stuff up. But so he left the guitar to collect some dust, and then I would pick it up myself. And I actually taught myself how to play guitar using just the internet and tabs.
Nice. Right on. So you start playing guitar and writing some parody songs, some funny stuff, and then later come to the realization, you hear Blink, you're like, oh, I can actually be funny. And then you start getting into comedy. When did you do stand-up comedy first without the guitar? When was that?
That would probably be, it would be a mix before I left the comedy scene in around 2015. So maybe 2013 to 2015 as I was transitioning further towards my military career seriously. And so I was actually, I mentioned earlier, I was a theater major. And so whenever I do scenes or plays, once you get through the whole process of memorizing the lines and all that, you kind of, if you're bored, because you do it so many times over, you parody those lines. And so I got really good at quipping and doing improv during my scenes, which would irritate my directors, but I would get a laugh out of it. So, being a theater kid, your ego stroked. So that could constitute as when I'd start doing minimal stand-up a little bit. But then when I actually did it for a serious, I performed it at a couple bars and whatnot, just by request. And especially when, the logistics of bringing your guitar, you think it's easy just to plug in your guitar and go. Sometimes they don't have a sound system.
Right.
The sound guy's not there. So you just have to do it on the fly. So that would probably be where I'm would do regular stand-up.
Right. Interesting. So do you feel like you're trying to strike a balance between the music and the stand-up? I do want to talk about the sort of characters, because you're one of the only ones I know here in Hawaii. I know Ian Shippen, he's got a one character that I haven't seen him do it live, but I just saw a clip of it the other day. But I'd say more than anybody else, you're doing character work. So that's pretty unique. But are you trying to strike a balance at the moment? Are you going more one way than the other?
Oh, so I don't have a definite answer for that, because I have this tendency of taking an idea and running with it. That's why I like this idea of variety. Talking to some of my mentors in the comedy scene, they say, no, what you want to do is you need to focus on one specific idea, and then you got to double down on that to get your demographic, which I think is very sound advice. But for me, I'm kind of just like a dog chasing cars. I just go one after the other. And when I find an idea that I like, I just say yes and how can I do that? Like the Blink-182 song, I literally was in the shower and I go, oh, I'm 34. The lyric goes, nobody likes you when you're 23. What would it be like if the song was for 33-year-olds? And so I just took that idea, this gift from the gods, and I go, okay, cool, I'll take that. And I ran with it. With the character work, I like this idea of a variety show. I do musical comedy, I do a parody, I do character work, I do stand-up. And so I try to lean towards the idea of being an entertainer, not just like bottleneck myself, but just a comedian. Because, the more things you try, the more you can add that into like your little toolkit. Right. And then you can apply towards a wider demographic, even though I've been told you need to focus on a specific one. I don't want to be seen as just he's a dude with a guitar. There's a very up and coming comedian that's already doing that. And he's very talented at what he does. And what I don't want to do is say like, oh, he's like a discount or Kirkland signature Costco version of that guy. I want to be seen as versatile and not necessarily typecast myself into one specific role, which when I was doing theater, that's exactly what would happen. Like, all right, cool. You have short man complex issues and you're very punchy, and just take off your shirt and just stand there like, oh, okay, great. So you want to try to mix things up. And the more I can reach out to different people, the more people I can make laugh, the more rewarding that is for me, because it's always a good challenge. It's easy to stick with what you're good at, but if you can go over that and then reach out to people that you wouldn't seem to think you could relate to, that's even better for myself.
Tell me a little bit about I didn't know you had studied theater. That seems like it would help immensely with getting on stage, especially to do character work. I mean, right? I think in my mind, getting on stage to try to do character work, that's scarier than crowd work that seems really challenging. Talk about the theater background and how that's helped you with comedy.
Well, I would always recommend to any young adult or even kids in their teenage years to at least take one theater class. And the reason for that is because, one, you can identify yourself, and in addition to that, open yourself to perspectives from a different perspective, literally from the different perspective of another character. I had a really good professor he had cerebral palsy. He had to use a cane for most of his life, and he was probably one of the best actors I've ever seen. And he was always the kind of person to say yes and take a situation and roll with it. And so he would have this philosophy: no matter what in life, if you're in theater, you have to do 3 roles. You need to be the villain, you need to be in drag, and you need to be a stripper. And so the reason he said that is that it's a very uncomfortable situation. Not many people want to be the bad guy, even though you could argue that there's a lot of cool characters that are bad guys. Not everyone's comfortable with stripping. Not everyone's comfortable being in the opposite gender role. And so for me, who would at the time like to think I was a fairly masculine guy, I joined the army, right? I was cool stuff. I was a little wary about doing those roles. And so by doing that, it broke my ego down to go, at the end of the day, you're just a person. And so just like the role, you can put it on, you can take it off. It doesn't make you who you are, but now you have that experience and that thought process to be more open to it. And so when I tried those things, I go, oh, great. My ego wasn't as inflated. And I go, okay, cool. And not only was it, I don't want to use the word transcendent, but that's the only thing that I think of. I went beyond of having this caricature of these different kinds of characters and go, oh, great, I can do more that I wasn't comfortable with. So the idea of speaking in public or being on stage, which was already terrifying at the time for me, was even more so made comfortable by being in those 3 different roles. I do my What's My Age Again performance in drag as a nurse, and I have no issues with that. So
is the emulation of the nurse on the cover of the CD?
Exactly. Yeah. And so, and that's the thing, it all ties together, because had I not been comfortable with that, doing drag way back when I was talking to my producers and my sound engineers, I go, hey, how are we going to market this new cover for What's My Age Again? If you're not familiar with it, it's the nurse with the glove, Nurse Janine. And so they're like, well, we could do 2 things. We could do a modern version of it, of a girl who's not in her 20s as a nurse, and do a 40-year-old or 30-year-old. Or, this might be a fun idea. So we had a lot of fun, and I was able to tap into different markets. So one with the punk rock scene, one with the comedy, and then those also who might be fans of the drag.
Interesting. So you've got what are some of the other characters you have? You've got the nurse from Blink-182. You've got the Donald Trump, this version of Donald Trump. What else? What other characters are you developing?
It was it wasn't really much of a character. I love doing accents as well. And so for maybe a couple of years, on and off, I would do this bit where I would replicate when I used to be, before I got married, I had an interaction with my future ex-father-in-law, and my uncle who I mentioned earlier, the Filipino uncle boy, and my future father-in-law who's Japanese. And so I love this because they're both singers. And they both love 80s hair metal. And so I imagine this wonderful scene of both of them being at a karaoke during after the wedding or whatever. And so I made this Weezer cover of Say It Ain't So, where I emulate to be fair, my Filipino uncle's singing voice is not thick and Filipino, so it's more of a Filipino caricature. And so I would emulate a Filipino caricature singing Say It Ain't So, and then I would switch to a very thick Japanese accent, which my ex-father-in-law does have a very thick Japanese accent. And so it was more for me as a challenge versus making fun of those specific races and their accents, but more of a challenge for me to see if I can actually legitimately emulate it. And so that's also a reason why I stopped doing it. As you know, in Hawaii, we have a very prominent Asian demographic. And so I'd only play for mostly Asian audiences because they see it. Oh, that sounds like my uncle. That's fun because it sounds like you're perfecting that voice. Whereas when I wouldn't play for actual Asian audiences, you could also see the demographics who weren't part of the Asian groups go like, should I laugh at this? Is this caricature? Or it'd be the opposite. They go, oh, this feels like a ching chong joke. I want to go with that. This is hilarious, which I kind of want to steer away from.
Right.
It is a craft, but for me specifically, I don't want to anchor myself to just identity or Asian politics or Asian identity as my demographic.
So you mentioned a minute ago, and I do want to talk about the military because I've heard you tell a little bit about that story, but we'll get to that later. But you mentioned a minute ago that like the Blink 182 song, the idea came in the shower. I think for a lot of comedians that a lot of ideas come in the shower or in the restroom or in the car or something like that. Does that tend to be the case for you? Do you have a time that you daily or weekly sit down and write? Like what's your creative process look like?
So the creative process comes from one of my favorite books. It's by Marcus Aurelius. It's his journal, The Meditations. It's a really great Stoicism book. It's applicable towards anything you do. And there's a chapter that focuses on him saying bilateral movements and just walking in general. I might be misquoting that. But both Arnold Schwarzenegger and Marcus Aurelius both say being out in nature and walking is very good for constructive processes, right? So for me, whenever I'm walking to the gym or if I'm doing cardio in the gym or if I'm just in the gym, that's when I feel like my brain is the most receptive and it takes in ideas or creates ideas. The second an idea pops into my head or a gift from the God comes from the skies, then I will take my phone and I just have a huge library of notes. And they're just, it's except like my dad's desktop on his computer, just completely unorganized. But I'll have the other notes saying like, hey, this is just an idea as a title, and then I'll run with it, add little notes there. And then back when I was drinking, now that I'm sober, I don't do it as much. But when I was drinking and I would be editing my videos and then I would take it to a bar and I just sit there and from there, flesh it out, have a couple drinks, allow that to saturate and then create even more ideas based on that one theme. And as far as, when I used to work, I'm currently unemployed, but when I used to sit in traffic, you know how atrocious traffic is. Just like shower singing or car singing, I would sing a song. And then if I go, oh, you know what? I really like this song. This is a current issue I want to address. I'm going to do a parody of it. I'm actually working on a parody right now. Chapel Roan, she got a bunch of Grammys recently. And part of my Donald Trump character, I wrote an entire song based on Donald Trump covering that song Pink Pony Club. It's one of her more famous songs. And so my intent would be to have a song that demographically pleases both, where one, Republicans can go look at that. I can get behind that. And then the left going, oh, this is fun because I like Chapel Roan. So
right. Well, that's interesting. I think like as a comedian to be able to poke fun at both sides, right? I think that's a necessity, regardless of who in real life we might have voted for. Yeah, I think that's increasingly important. Like just looking at the last few weeks, I mean, politically, like where things are is wild, dude. It's a wild time to be alive, and some people are freaking out. Some people are rejoicing, and boy, I feel like, you gotta be able to make jokes on both sides.
I completely agree. Yeah. I firmly believe in just the benevolence of most human beings, specifically for Americans, because, we're both American and you want to root for your home team. But I feel like even with, because coming from a military background and you could argue a very liberal background because I studied theater, I was exposed to all different walks of life. And just in my experience with working with so many different people from also different cultures, that generally most people that you want to be around just want the same things. They want food, shelter, water, and the ability to have a family. And if not, then the respect for others who do. And I think just taking those rules and applying it in anywhere just should be foundational. And so for me, comedy is my channel of getting to people like that. Being able to make people laugh, I feel like is one of the most basic ways of relating to someone. Because one, it shows that you're able to listen, and then two, show empathy by bringing it out through the humor. And so if I can do that through any kind of demographic, and that's the same reason why it goes back to me not wanting to stick myself in one, I want to reach everybody. And if I can make everyone in the world laugh, which sounds like a big dream and kind of just reaching out super high up there. But if I could make everyone in the world laugh, that's one of the best things. I would rather have everyone laughing together in a room versus at each other's throat than, pointing
right.
all that.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned several times military. Are you able to say, I mean, So you're not in the military at present. And I've heard you talk just a little bit about this in various shows that I've seen you at. What happened with the military situation? Because that's comedy related, yeah?
Yeah, so I'm absolutely at liberty to speak about this because I'm out. The long story short was that I was kicked out of the military based on an administrative punishment. I basically, in uniform, this is the biggest part. In uniform, I performed a inappropriate cover song of Tenacious D. That's Jack Black's band, right? And I did it in uniform, regardless if it was by request or not. When you're an officer, I was a captain at the time. When you're an officer, you have to conduct yourself like an officer at all times. And so I received an administrative punishment for misconduct, specifically for singing a Jack Black song. And that would lead to basically a general officer reprimand. That's a general who writes a letter saying, hey, you didn't do anything illegal. However, I am at liberty to say that you are not fit for duty for this reason here. Now, what can happen with that administrative punishment, you can have it either filed locally or filed permanently. If it's filed locally, that means it'll go away once you go to another duty station. If it's filed permanently, it's exactly how it sounds. It says in your record. Now, they say when you receive this, the short expression for it's called a GOMAR, General Officer Memorandum of Reprimand. When you receive a GOMAR permanently, that's what we call a career killer. And so you're not going to be up for promotion. And if you go for promotion, most likely you won't get selected. So I would not make major. And in more serious events, if the general officer wants to, upon the receipt of that kind of administrative punishment, specifically if it's permanent, that officer has the authority to make a recommendation for separation. And so having the receipt of this GOMAR, the general officer decided not only did he want to file it permanently, he also filed to have me separated from the Army. I served for 17 years. I went as an enlisted from a private to a buck sergeant. I got a commission as an officer when I got my theater degree, and I went from a lieutenant to a captain. I was up for major the next year, and I made this, I will own that. I made this stupid mistake of playing that song. Regardless, that was my decision, and that general officer, which he was fully entitled to do so, made, which I still believe was a little bit of a severe punishment to separate me for that. And that's pretty much the short story to that.
Man, 17 years in and is a song that brought it to an end. It's wild, man.
Yeah.
I've heard of way worse going down in the military and not receiving anything even close to that. My goodness. Wow.
Yeah. And then even registering it, and here's the thing, when I played this song, I did not think it would go to that level of extreme punishment because, I served in an infantry battalion, right? All infantry guys. And the fun thing is that the front row were all female soldiers. And so they try, we can't swear on this, but the song specifically was by Tenacious D. And so I dumbed it down and I made this quip. They used this against me in the investigation. I used this quip. Hi, the song is inappropriate. I'm going to dumb it down to a PG version. I might get fired for this. I said that as a clearly sarcastic quip because I didn't think they would because it's a song and, the standard at the time for the infantry was a little different. It might be different now with this administration. But so I didn't think it was going to escalate to that level of severity with punishment. And so when the investigation came out, in the context, they wrote out the transcript. They go, Captain Wong says this is probably going to get me fired, and he continued to play the song anyway. And I got the testimonies from a handful of the female soldiers in the audience who said, I clearly know the distinction between comedy and sexual harassment, to which the latter it is not, because he's a clear comedian. We asked him to play. There was only one anonymous complaint out of an audience of 400 people there. And to this day, I will never know who that person sent that anonymous complaint. But that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Wow. But that's a thing too about, going to a comedy show or a show where there's going to be a comedian. There's always some kind of risk there, right? For an audience member as well as a performer, right? As the comedian, like if you venture at all into crowd work, you never know what's going to happen. It's all spontaneous, or at least it should be, in my opinion. But you never really know. What's going to be said, who's going to be in the audience, what's going to happen. That's wild. So you've dove in head first, feet first, however you want to say it, then into comedy. You've been at it for 15 years or so with a little bit of time off here and there. But it seems now, at least since I've been in your sphere, that you're going pretty full throttle at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And is that the intent going forward? Is that, you mentioned the dream of making everybody laugh, but is is it a goal to become a full-time comedian? Or
Yes, absolutely. I'm great at a lot of things, doing my operation stuff as an officer. I was trying to get into the civilian world with that, but with current politics right now, there's a lot of lack of funding for contracting and there's a freeze on federal jobs. So I might just have to go back to bartending sometime soon. But if I can take this craft and then apply it to the point where I can put food on the table as a comedian, great. We could talk about this later, but my son and my ex-wife are actually in Japan. My ex-wife doesn't care how I send the alimony and the child support. As long as I make that money, I can do it. And then if comedy allows me to travel and see my son more often, then I will.
Do you have any aspirations? I mean, do you want to stay in Hawaii? Do you want to get to Japan? Like what's that look like?
So realistically, what I want to do, the goal is to maintain somewhat of a foothold here in Hawaii because my roots go all the way back to, I'm part Hawaiian, so I go back a bunch of generations. And so I firmly believe that Hawaiians need to be in Hawaii. I was fortunate enough to take my military service and apply that to staying here. So I was able to get a VA loan and actually buy property out here. And so it's very hard for people today, even like locals, especially locals and Hawaiians, to get land on their own home. And so I want to maintain that foothold while at the same time offering my son, has to make a choice of being either Japanese or American when he becomes 18, to choose. And so my goal is to build his nest egg here, and then he can take the property when he's old enough. Or if he wants to continue being Japanese and stay in Japan, he can do that too. So if I can get enough of a foothold where I'm comfortable with checks and move out to Japan, be closer to him and just be his father and be around, that takes priority over anything. But realistically, me and his ex-wife have both decided, hey, he's young enough where you can just bust your butt hard enough that you can make enough money and then send it over, or, make yourself comfortable enough to move over eventually when he's a little bit older, but not too young to where he doesn't remember dad's not around.
Is there, I am pretty ignorant of like Japanese comedy or stand-up comedy. Like I saw you and Ian did a show this weekend and you had like a bunch of Japanese students show up, which kind of interesting. Be curious to hear about that. And then also, is there like, what's stand-up scene like in Japan? Like, do you have any idea of that?
I've yet to watch a stand-up comedy show in Japan. But the curious thing is that my ex-wife is from Kyoto. That's in the Kansai region further south. And in Kyoto specifically, they are known to have some of the best comedians out there. Now, it was unfortunate that I was not able to view any of those comedy shows. But they say, like, as opposed to Tokyo, people are a little bit, it's kind of like New York. Everyone's like really crammed in their city life and they're a little bit more uptight. Whereas in Kansai, it's not uncommon for them to be more chill. And so one of the worst insults you can give to someone from that Kansai region is telling them that they're not funny. And so even with my ex-father-in-law, his humor, I would say it was also similar to like dry English humor. And so if you blink, you'll miss the humor, but it's definitely there. It's very subtle. And I guess in a way you could say it's very stony. Yeah. They'll say something, they'll have a quip and it'll saturate. And then a minute later, you're like, oh my God, that's the most hilarious thing. I'm not sure if a lot of people know this, but Japanese culture can be very passive aggressive. Us Americans, we say what we want to say, right? And so I guess a good example would be like, if you're having a conversation with someone from Japan and they say something like, "Oh, you look healthy," that's them calling you fat. Or one of the best expressions that I've heard from Japanese culture is, "What a lovely watch you have," and that's telling them, "Look at the time, get out of my house." Something like that, like. And if you're a Westerner or if you're not exposed to Japanese culture, you go, "Well, thanks, it's a Rolex. I got that. Thank you very much. It is a nice watch. Appreciate that." But they're just saying, "No, you've been here for hours. Get out. Go."
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, yeah, this is fascinating stuff, and I mean, wide range of things we've been able to talk about. Vocation and military and politics and theater. I just did back in the fall. I did an improv class, an 8-week improv class, which was pretty cool. And I don't know if it helped me all that much with my comedy, but I imagine it did a little bit. The yes and thing. That's you learn that first 5 minutes, right? That's sort of the standard. But I would recommend that to other people to try to take that. It puts you in situations that you'd never be in, that you got to adapt to, that could be very uncomfortable. You got to try to find work your way out of that, or just live in it and get comfortable with it. I think that's a good thing to do. I wish I could have taken the round 2 class, but that was in North Carolina when I was doing that. So I'm back here now, but Yeah, so man, I appreciate you sharing this. We're gonna wrap up the first part here, friends, and then we're going to jump into a second part. But let me remind you, if you are on Instagram, to check out the handle Handsome Harold, and you can follow Harold over there. He's got almost 1,200 followers here, so we can help maybe bump him up to that a little bit. But see a bunch of his music clips and stand-up clips and all of that. A lot of good stuff on here. So Handsome Harold. Should we look for you anywhere else? I see you got a link tree here.
Yeah, so there's a link tree in there that can take you straight to my YouTube and my Spotify. So if you like any of my musical comedy, majority of my songs are located on.
Right on. So check this out. Go to the link tree as well. And you can even give a donation, throw some support his way. I'm sure he'd be grateful for that. But in part 2 of this, we are going to have Handsome Harold, share a joke with us that he's written and talk about the sort of genesis of the joke and the journey of that joke to its current form. So you want to make sure that you tune in to that episode as well. And then we're just going to write jokes on the spot like I do with every comedian we have on the podcast here. Yeah, this is part 1. You want to make sure you're keeping your eyes peeled for part 2 as well. So we're going to stop here. Harold, dude, thanks for being on. And thanks to all of y'all for watching or listening, whatever medium you're taking this in. We appreciate that. But Michael Halcomb, and this is Messed Up to Setups. We're going to stop there and say we hope that helped.
It's all messed up, yeah, everything's messed up. We're going from this mess up to the next setup. Everything seems so messed up, but it's just